The morning sun had barely crested the ridge of the Blue Mountain Range when the sirens split the quiet of Cedar Falls, Tennessee. Marcus Cole was standing beside his motorcycle outside the Iron Horse Diner, a steaming cup of black coffee in his hand, when 3 patrol cars skidded into the gravel lot. Dust rose like a curtain between him and the approaching officers. He did not move. He did not flinch. He had seen worse in Fallujah. He had survived worse in Kandahar. Whatever this was, he would face it the way he faced everything, standing. Deputy Sheriff Randall Greer stepped out first, hand resting on his holster, like a man who had already made up his mind. Behind him came 2 younger officers, their faces tight with nervous energy. Marcus noticed the way their eyes kept darting to his leather vest, to the patches stitched across his chest. Iron Wolves MC, Sergeant at Arms. 3 tours of duty in the United States Marine Corps. These were not symbols of menace. They were symbols of service. But he knew how some people read them. Greer stopped 3 feet away. His jaw was set, his eyes cold. Marcus had seen that look before, on men who confused authority with righteousness. "What can I do for you, Deputy?" The question was calm, measured, the kind of voice that comes from years of discipline. "Marcus Cole, you are under arrest for aggravated assault and battery." The words landed like stones in still water. Marcus did not blink. Assault on who? Greer reached for his cuffs. Bradley Whitmore, son of Judge Whitmore. "You beat him half to death last night behind the VFW hall." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. Not fear, recognition. He knew this game. He had seen it played before in different countries, different uniforms, different languages. The same script, the powerful protecting their own, the truth buried under paperwork and politics. "I was not anywhere near the VFW last night." Greer grabbed his wrist. "Save it for the courtroom." The other officers moved in. Marcus let them. He did not resist. Resistance would only make things worse. And somewhere deep in his gut, he knew that this was only the beginning. Inside the diner, faces pressed against the glass. Mabel Turner, the owner, had known Marcus for 15 years. She had watched him grow from a wild kid into a man who volunteered every Thanksgiving at the homeless shelter, who organized charity rides for children with cancer, who never once raised his voice in anger inside her establishment. She watched them put him in the back of the cruiser, and something inside her cracked. "This is wrong," she whispered. "This is so wrong." The drive to the county jail took 23 minutes. Marcus spent every second of it in silence, watching the familiar streets of Cedar Falls slide past the window. He had been born in this town. He had buried his father in this town. He had sworn to protect it, first as a soldier overseas, then as a brother in the Iron Wolves. And now this same town was putting him in chains. At the station, they took his vest, his wallet, his phone. They photographed him. They fingerprinted him. They put him in a holding cell that smelled of disinfectant and despair. And through it all, Marcus said nothing, because he knew that words meant nothing here. Not yet. Not until the right moment. 3 hours passed, then 4. The fluorescent light above him flickered and buzzed. He sat on the metal bench, hands clasped between his knees, and he waited. Finally, a guard came to the cell door. "Cole, your lawyer is here." Marcus looked up. He had not called a lawyer. The guard led him to a small room with a metal table and 2 chairs. Sitting on the other side was a woman in her mid-50s, silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. She wore a tailored gray suit and carried a leather briefcase that looked older than Marcus. "Mr. Cole, my name is Eleanor Vance. I have been retained to represent you." Marcus sat down slowly. "Who retained you?" Eleanor smiled. A thin, knowing smile. "Let us just say that you have friends who believe in your innocence. Friends who have been watching what happens in this town for a very long time." He studied her face. There was something familiar about her. Something he could not quite place. "Before we proceed," she continued, opening her briefcase, "I need you to tell me exactly where you were last night. Every detail, every minute." Marcus took a breath. and then he told her. He had spent the evening at the Iron Wolves clubhouse on the outskirts of town. It was their monthly meeting, a gathering of the Brotherhood to discuss upcoming charity events, to check in on members who were struggling, to reinforce the bonds that held them together. He had arrived at 6:30 and had not left until almost midnight. 32 men could vouch for his presence. 32 witnesses. 32 brothers. Eleanor wrote everything down in neat, precise handwriting.
"Good," she said when he finished. "That is very good." "But the Whitmores have power here," Marcus said. "The judge has been running this county for 20 years. His word is law. His son is untouchable." Eleanor looked up from her notes. Her eyes were steady, unafraid. "No one is untouchable, Mr. Cole, not anymore." She closed her briefcase and stood. "Your arraignment is tomorrow morning. I will see you there." She knocked on the door, and the guard let her out. Marcus watched her go, and for the first time since the handcuffs clicked around his wrists, he felt something that might have been hope. That night, he did not sleep. He lay on the thin mattress in his cell and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant sounds of the jail, footsteps, doors clanging, the occasional murmur of voices. He thought about his brothers in the Iron Wolves. He thought about everything they had built together, the rides for sick children, the food drives, the mentorship programs for at-risk youth. They were not outlaws. They were guardians. They were the men who showed up when no one else would. And now someone was trying to tear that apart. Morning came slowly, gray and cold. They gave him a clean shirt for court. They put him in a transport van with barred windows. And as they drove through the streets of Cedar Falls, he saw something that made his breath catch in his throat. Motorcycles, dozens of them, lined up along Main Street. Brothers from every chapter in the state. They stood beside their bikes in their leather vests, arms crossed, faces hard. They did not chant. They did not hold signs. They simply stood, a silent wall of solidarity. The van slowed. Deputy Greer, sitting in the front, muttered something under his breath. Marcus could not hear the words, but he could see the tension in the man's shoulders. They parked behind the courthouse. Marcus was led through a back entrance, away from the crowd, but he could still feel them. Their presence, their strength. It was like a current running through the walls. The courtroom was small and old, with wooden benches worn smooth by decades of use. Judge Harold Whitmore sat behind the bench, his robes crisp, his expression carefully neutral. To his left, the prosecution table was occupied by District Attorney Thomas Mercer, a thin man with cold eyes and a reputation for never losing. To his right, Eleanor Vance sat alone, her briefcase open before her, a single folder resting on the table. Marcus was led to the defense table. The bailiff removed his cuffs. He sat down beside Eleanor and waited. The arraignment began with the reading of the charges. Aggravated assault, battery, causing grievous bodily harm. The words echoed through the courtroom like accusations from another world, a world where Marcus was not a decorated veteran, not a volunteer, not a brother. A world where he was simply a criminal. "How does the defendant plead?" Eleanor stood. "Not guilty, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Bail will be set at—" "Your Honor," Eleanor interrupted, "I move to dismiss all charges against my client." The courtroom stirred. Thomas Mercer rose to his feet. "On what grounds?" Eleanor opened her folder and removed a stack of documents. "On the grounds that my client has an airtight alibi supported by 32 sworn witnesses who were with him at the time of the alleged assault. On the grounds that security camera footage from the Iron Wolves clubhouse clearly shows Mr. Cole present from 6:30 in the evening until 11:58 at night. And on the grounds that the alleged victim, Bradley Whitmore, has a documented history of making false accusations against individuals he has personal conflicts with." She handed the documents to the bailiff, who passed them to the judge. The courtroom had gone silent. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Judge Whitmore looked at the papers. His face did not change, but something flickered behind his eyes. Something like fear. "Furthermore," Eleanor continued, I have obtained sworn statements from 3 witnesses who saw Bradley Whitmore engaged in a physical altercation with 2 other individuals outside the Rusty Nail Bar at approximately 10:45 last night. These individuals, whose names are included in the documentation, have admitted to the confrontation and have provided detailed accounts that directly contradict the charges against my client. She paused. Let her words settle. Your Honor, this case is not about justice. It is about power. It is about a young man who believes that his father's position makes him immune to consequences. It is about a system that has looked the other way for far too long. But today, that system faces a choice. Uphold the truth or become complicit in a lie. The silence that followed was absolute. Judge Whitmore stared at the documents in his hands. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, he did not move. Then, slowly, he set the papers down. The charges against Marcus Cole are dismissed. The words fell like a gavel strike. The courtroom erupted. People rose to their feet, voices overlapped, but Marcus did not move. He sat perfectly still, his hands flat on the table, his eyes fixed on the judge. It was over. But something in Eleanor's expression told him that it was not. Not yet. Court is adjourned, the judge said, his voice barely audible above the noise. He rose and disappeared through the door behind the bench. Thomas Mercer gathered his papers without looking at anyone and walked out. The bailiff came to escort Marcus from the courtroom. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. The motorcycles still lined Main Street. The brothers still stood beside them. And when Marcus emerged from the courthouse, free and unchained, they did not cheer. They did not celebrate. They simply nodded. One by one, brother to brother, he walked down the steps. Eleanor Vance appeared beside him. Thank you, he said, for everything. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. A military challenge coin. Bronze. Worn smooth by years of handling. On one side was an eagle. On the other, 3 words, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. Marcus stared at it. He knew that coin. He had seen it before, in a photograph, on his father's nightstand, in a story his mother used to tell. My father carried that coin, Eleanor said quietly. He served with a young Marine in Vietnam. That Marine saved his life. They stayed friends until the day my father died. She paused. That Marine was your father. Marcus could not speak. The weight of the moment pressed down on him like a hand. Your father was a good man, Eleanor continued. He believed in honor, in duty, in standing up for what is right, even when it costs you everything. She smiled, a real smile this time. I came here because I owe a debt that can never be repaid, but also because this town needs someone to fight for it, someone who is not afraid of the people who think they own it. She pressed the coin into his hand. Keep it. Let it remind you that you are never alone. She turned and walked toward a waiting car. Marcus watched her go, the coin warm in his palm, the weight of generations settling on his shoulders. Behind him, his brothers waited. He turned to face them. Victor Cross, the president of the Iron Wolves, stood at the front. His gray beard was trimmed close, his eyes sharp and knowing. He had been riding since before Marcus was born. He had built the club into what it was today, not a gang, but a family, not outlaws, but guardians. How are you holding up? Victor asked. Marcus looked at the coin in his hand, then at the rows of motorcycles, then at the courthouse behind him. Better now. Victor nodded. The brothers are ready, whatever you need. I need to know who really attacked Bradley Whitmore. I need to know why they tried to pin it on me. Victor exchanged a glance with the men beside him. We have been working on that since last night. There are things happening in this town, Marcus. Things that go deeper than one rich kid throwing a tantrum. What kind of things? Victor gestured toward his motorcycle. Get on. We will talk at the clubhouse. Marcus walked to his own bike, the Harley that had been released from the impound lot that morning. He swung his leg over the seat, felt the familiar weight beneath him, the rumble of the engine as it came to life. They rode out together, 47 motorcycles in formation. The thunder of their engines rolled through Cedar Falls like a declaration. People stopped on the sidewalks to watch. Some waved, some just stared. But everyone felt it, the presence of something larger than themselves. Something that could not be silenced. The Iron Wolves clubhouse sat on 10 acres of wooded land outside town. It was a converted barn, expanded over the years into a meeting hall, a workshop, and a gathering place for the Brotherhood. When they pulled into the lot, the sun was high and the air smelled of pine and motor oil. Inside, the main room was already full. Brothers from 4 different chapters had gathered. Some Marcus knew well. Others he had only met at rallies and rides, but they all wore the same patch. They all shared the same code. Victor called the meeting to order. The room fell silent. Last night, one of our own was falsely accused. He was arrested, humiliated, and put in a cell for a crime he did not commit. Today, the charges were dropped. But this is not over. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Bradley Whitmore was not attacked by Marcus. He was attacked by 2 men who work for his own father. Men who have been doing the judge's dirty work for years. Intimidation, threats, making problems disappear. Bradley got in the way of something, we do not know what yet, and they handled it the way they handle everything. But this time they needed a scapegoat, and they chose one of us. Murmurs rippled through the room. Why Marcus? Someone asked. Victor looked at Marcus. Because Marcus has been asking questions about the land deals, about the missing permits, about the money flowing through the judge's office that does not add up. It was true. For months, Marcus had been digging. He had noticed discrepancies in county records, properties changing hands without public auction, construction projects approved without environmental review. He had not made it public yet, he was still gathering evidence, but someone had found out. They tried to bury you before you could bury them, Victor said, and they almost succeeded. So, what do we do now? Marcus asked. Victor smiled. That thin, dangerous smile that meant the game was about to change. Now we finish what you started. The next 3 days were a blur of activity. The brothers divided into teams. Some focused on gathering documents, property records, financial statements, meeting minutes from the county board. Others reached out to contacts in law enforcement, in journalism, in state government. The Iron Wolves had connections that spanned decades. Veterans. Former cops. Business owners. People who owed them favors or simply believed in what they stood for. Marcus worked alongside them, but his mind kept returning to Eleanor Vance, to the coin she had given him, to the connection between their fathers that he had never known about. He had grown up hearing stories about his father's service in Vietnam, but the details had always been vague. His mother had never liked to talk about the war. She said it had changed his father in ways that never fully healed. Now, holding that coin, Marcus understood. His father had carried a debt of his own, a debt of honor, a bond with a man who had saved his life, and that bond had reached across generations, across time, to save Marcus when he needed it most. On the 4th day, a breakthrough came. One of the brothers, a former accountant named Ray Delgado, had been analyzing the financial records they had obtained. He called an emergency meeting at the clubhouse, his face pale, his hands trembling. I found it, he said, the connection, the reason they tried to take Marcus down. He spread a series of documents across the table, maps, bank statements, contracts. Judge Whitmore has been running a scheme for at least 8 years, Ray explained. He approves zoning changes for properties that are about to be developed. But before the public knows, shell companies, companies he controls through intermediaries, buy the land at low prices. Then, when the development is approved, they sell at a massive profit. Insider trading, Victor said, with public land. Ray nodded. Exactly. And it gets worse. Some of those developments have displaced families, small businesses, even a veterans' housing project that was supposed to be built 3 years ago. The land was bought out from under them. The room went silent. Marcus thought of the veterans he knew, the ones struggling to find housing, the ones sleeping in shelters or on the streets, the ones who had given everything for their country and received nothing in return. How much are we talking? he asked. Ray looked at his notes. Conservatively? $12 million over 8 years. Probably more. Marcus felt something ignite in his chest. Not anger, something colder, more focused. The kind of clarity that came before action. Can we prove it? Ray hesitated. We have enough to raise serious questions, but to make it stick, we need someone on the inside, someone who was part of it, someone willing to testify. Who? There was a long pause. Then Victor spoke. Bradley Whitmore. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Objections flew. But Victor raised his hand, and the noise subsided. I know what you are thinking, he said. The kid is a spoiled brat who tried to send Marcus to prison. But think about it. He was attacked by his own father's men. He was used as a pawn. Whatever he did to anger his father, it was enough to get him hurt. He is not a loyal soldier. He is a liability. And right now, he might be the only person scared enough to turn on the judge. Marcus considered this. He thought about the look in Bradley's eyes during the arraignment, the brief moment when their gazes had met. There had been something there. Not defiance. Not arrogance. Fear. Where is he now? Marcus asked. St. Mary's Hospital, Ray said. Private room. 2 guards outside. His father's guards? Ray nodded. Then we need to get to him before he does. The plan came together over the next 12 hours. They could not storm the hospital. They could not threaten or intimidate. That was not their way. Instead, they would use the one weapon that had always served them best: the truth. Marcus would go in alone. Not as a member of the Iron Wolves, not as a man seeking revenge, but as a veteran. A fellow human being, someone who understood what it meant to be trapped by forces beyond your control. Eleanor Vance arranged for a visitor's pass. She had connections at the hospital, board members who owed her favors, doctors who respected her work. By 6 p.m, Marcus was walking through the sterile corridors of St. Mary's, his heart steady, his mind clear. The guards outside Bradley's room were exactly where Ray had said they would be. 2 large men in dark suits. They looked at Marcus with suspicion. No visitors, one of them said. Marcus held up his pass. I am on the approved list. Check with the desk. The guard hesitated. Then he pulled out his phone and made a call. A moment later, he stepped aside. 10 minutes. Marcus pushed open the door. Bradley Whitmore lay in the hospital bed, his face swollen, one arm in a cast, monitors beeping softly beside him. He looked smaller than Marcus remembered. Younger. Broken. He looked up when Marcus entered. His eyes went wide. What are you? I did not. Marcus raised a hand. I am not here to hurt you. I am not even here to blame you. Bradley stared at him, uncomprehending. I am here because I think we are both victims of the same man. The words hung in the air. Bradley's expression shifted, from fear to confusion to something that might have been recognition. You do not understand, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. You do not know what he is capable of. Then tell me. Bradley looked at the door. At the guards beyond. At the walls that seemed to press in from every side. He will destroy me. He will destroy my mother. He has done it before. Marcus pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. I know about the land deals. I know about the shell companies. I know about the veterans' housing project that never got built. What I do not know is why his own men attacked you. Bradley closed his eyes. A tear slid down his bruised cheek. Because I was going to tell someone. I found documents in his office. Proof of everything. I was going to take them to a journalist. He found out. He said I was betraying the family. He said I needed to learn a lesson. He opened his eyes and looked at Marcus. My own father did this to me. And then he tried to blame you so no one would look at him. Marcus felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The injustice. The cruelty. The absolute corruption of a man who was supposed to uphold the law. I can help you, he said quietly. We can stop him, but I need you to be brave. I need you to tell the truth." Bradley was silent for a long time. The monitors beeped. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. Finally, he spoke. "What do I have to do?" 2 weeks later, the story broke. Bradley Whitmore testified before a state grand jury. He provided documents, recordings, and testimony that exposed his father's scheme in devastating detail. The evidence was overwhelming, the corruption undeniable. Judge Harold Whitmore was arrested at his home on a Tuesday morning. The same kind of morning when Marcus had been arrested, gray and cold, the air heavy with the smell of coming rain. But this time, there were no charges to dismiss, no scapegoat to blame, only the truth, laid bare for the whole world to see. The news spread quickly. National outlets picked up the story. Journalists descended on Cedar Falls like birds on a carcass. The town that had been invisible for so long was suddenly at the center of everything. And through it all, the Iron Wolves remained steady. They did not give interviews. They did not seek credit. They simply continued their work. The charity rides, the food drives, the mentorship programs. They were not heroes seeking glory. They were guardians doing their duty. Marcus stood outside the courthouse on the day of the judge's arraignment, watching the crowds gather. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but he stayed silent. This was not his moment. It belonged to everyone who had ever been crushed by corruption, everyone who had ever been silenced by power, everyone who had ever believed that justice was just a word. Eleanor Vance appeared beside him. "You did it," she said. Marcus shook his head. "We did it. All of us." She smiled. "Your father would be proud." He looked at the coin in his pocket, the one she had given him. Semper Fidelis. Always faithful. "I hope so," he said. The trial took 3 months. The evidence was presented. The witnesses testified. The defense tried every trick in the book, delays, objections, motions to dismiss. But in the end, the truth could not be denied. Judge Harold Whitmore was convicted on 17 counts of fraud, corruption, and obstruction of justice. He was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison. The day the verdict was announced, the Iron Wolves gathered at the clubhouse. Not to celebrate. Celebration seemed wrong. But to acknowledge. To remember. To recommit to the values that had guided them through the storm. Victor stood at the front of the room, his voice steady. "Brothers. What we did here was not about revenge. It was not about proving anything to anyone. It was about standing up for what is right, even when it costs us everything. It was about protecting the innocent, about holding the powerful accountable, about being the kind of men our fathers taught us to be." He paused. "This is not the end. There will be other battles, other injustices, other moments when the easy thing to do is look away. But we do not look away. We never look away. Because that is who we are. That is what we do. We take care of our own." The room was silent, but the silence was not empty. It was full of purpose, full of resolve, full of something that could not be named but could be felt in every heartbeat. Marcus looked around at the faces of his brothers, men he had ridden with, men he had served with, men who had stood beside him when the whole world seemed determined to tear him down. This, he realized, was family. Not by relation, but by choice, by loyalty, by love. And it was worth fighting for. 6 months later, the Veterans Housing Project broke ground. The land that Judge Whitmore had stolen was returned to the community through a court order. A new nonprofit, funded in part by donations from the Iron Wolves and their supporters, took over the development. The project would provide homes for 50 veterans and their families, a place where they could rebuild, where they could heal, where they could find the peace they had earned through service. Marcus stood at the groundbreaking ceremony, a shovel in his hands, the sun warm on his face. Around him were his brothers, veterans from wars spanning generations, families who had waited years for this moment. Bradley Whitmore was there too. He had testified against his father. He had lost everything: his inheritance, his social standing, his family name. But he had gained something else, something harder to define, but easier to feel. Marcus walked over to him after the ceremony. "How are you holding up?" Bradley shrugged. "One day at a time." Marcus nodded. "That is all any of us can do." He held out his hand. Bradley hesitated for a moment. Then he took it. "Thank you," Bradley said, "for giving me a chance to make things right." Marcus looked at him, at the bruises that had faded, at the fear that had been replaced by something calmer, something like hope. "We all deserve a second chance," he said. "What matters is what we do with it." He turned and walked back to his brothers. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and red. The air smelled of fresh earth and new beginnings. Victor stood beside his motorcycle, arms crossed, watching the last of the crowd disperse. "Good day," he said. Marcus nodded. "Good day." "What now?" Victor smiled. "Same thing we always do. Ride, serve, protect." He swung his leg over the seat. The engine roared to life. Marcus did the same. Around him, the other brothers mounted their bikes. 47 riders, one brotherhood, one purpose. They pulled out of the lot and onto the open road. The thunder of their engines echoed through the valley, a sound that Cedar Falls had come to know well, not a sound of menace, a sound of hope. A year later, Marcus received a letter. It came in a plain white envelope, postmarked from a federal penitentiary in Virginia. He knew who it was from before he opened it. "Mr. Cole," the letter began. "I do not expect you to read this. I do not expect you to care. But I am writing anyway because it is something I need to do. You were right, about all of it. I spent my whole life believing that power made you untouchable, that the rules were for other people, that I could do whatever I wanted as long as I was smart enough not to get caught. I was wrong. I sit in this cell now, thinking about all the lives I ruined, the families I displaced, the veterans I betrayed, the son I treated like property instead of a person. And I realized that I was never really powerful at all. I was just afraid. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of being seen for what I really was. You showed me the truth. Not through violence or revenge, through integrity, through courage, through the simple act of refusing to be silenced. I do not know if I will ever be able to make amends for what I have done, but I am trying. I am talking to counselors. I am studying. I am learning what it means to be accountable for my actions. I wanted you to know that, and I wanted to say thank you, not for putting me here. I put myself here, but for showing me that there is another way. That strength does not have to mean cruelty. That power does not have to mean corruption. I hope you find peace, Mr. Cole. You deserve it more than anyone I know. Harold Whitmore. Marcus read the letter 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in his pocket. That evening, he rode out to the Veterans Housing Project. The buildings were nearly complete now. Rows of neat, sturdy homes with American flags flying from the porches. Families had already begun moving in. Children played in the yards. Laughter echoed through the air. He parked his motorcycle and walked to a small memorial that had been erected at the center of the development. A bronze plaque mounted on a stone pillar. It read, "Dedicated to those who served, built by those who believed. May this place be a sanctuary for all who seek healing, hope, and home." Below the inscription was a list of names. Veterans who had contributed to the project. Volunteers who had given their time. Brothers who had ridden through storms to make this moment possible. And at the very bottom, 2 words, Semper Fidelis. Marcus touched the plaque. The bronze was warm from the sun. He thought of his father, of Eleanor Vance, of the coin that still rested in his pocket, worn smooth by a year of carrying. He thought of all the moments that had led him here. The arrest, the trial, the discovery, the testimony, the victory, the healing. He thought of Bradley Whitmore, who had found the courage to betray his own father for the sake of the truth. He thought of Judge Whitmore, sitting in a cell, finally confronting the man he had become. He thought of his brothers, who had never wavered, never doubted, never looked away. And he realized that this was what it meant to serve, not just in uniform, not just in war, but every day, in every choice, in every moment when the easy thing to do was nothing and the right thing to do was everything. He turned and walked back to his motorcycle. The sun was setting again, another day ending, another night beginning. But the light did not fade. It transformed, from gold to orange to deep, rich purple. A sky on fire with the promise of tomorrow. He started the engine. The rumble was familiar, comforting, a heartbeat he had known for years. He pulled out of the lot and onto the road. The wind rushed past him, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. The mountains rose on either side, ancient and unchanging. The road stretched ahead, winding through valleys and over ridges, leading to places he had been and places he had yet to discover. He was not alone. Behind him, in the distance, he heard the sound of other engines. Other brothers joining the ride, a convoy of purpose, a brotherhood of honor. They did not need to speak. They did not need to plan. They simply rode, together, forward, into whatever came next. Because that was who they were. That was what they did. They took care of their own. And they always would. Check if you are already subscribed to this channel. Stories like this one prove that courage, brotherhood, and truth can change the world. If you believe in those values, subscribe now and become part of this community. The months that followed the groundbreaking were filled with purpose. The Iron Wolves expanded their charity work. They partnered with local schools to create mentorship programs for at-risk youth. They organized rides to raise money for medical research. They volunteered at shelters and soup kitchens. They became a fixture in Cedar Falls, not as outsiders, but as neighbors, as friends, as family. Marcus found himself taking on more responsibility within the club. Victor, who had led the Iron Wolves for over 2 decades, began talking about the future, about succession, about what the brotherhood would look like when he was gone. "You have what it takes," Victor told him one evening, sitting on the porch of the clubhouse watching the sunset. "I am just doing my part," Marcus replied. "That is exactly what a leader says." Victor smiled. "The ones who want power are never the ones who should have it. The ones who accept it as a duty, a burden, a responsibility, those are the ones who make a difference." Marcus thought about this. He had never sought leadership. He had never wanted to be in charge. But he understood what Victor was saying. Leadership was not about control. It was about service, about putting others first, about making the hard choices when no one else would. "When the time comes," Victor said, "the brothers will follow you, not because you ask them to, because they trust you." Marcus looked at his mentor, at the man who had taught him so much about honor, duty, and sacrifice. "I will try to be worthy of that trust." Victor nodded. "That is all any of us can do." Spring came early that year. The snow melted, the rivers swelled, the trees burst into bloom, carpeting the mountains in shades of green and gold. It was a season of renewal, of new beginnings, of hope. Marcus received word that Eleanor Vance had passed away. The news came in a phone call from her daughter, a woman Marcus had never met but who spoke of him as if she had known him her whole life. "My mother talked about you often," the daughter said. "She said you reminded her of her father, of the kind of man he was." Marcus did not know what to say. He held the phone in silence, feeling the weight of loss settle over him. "She left something for you," the daughter continued. "Something she wanted you to have." "Can I send it?" "Of course." 2 weeks later, a package arrived at the clubhouse. Inside was a leather journal, worn and cracked with age. On the first page, in faded ink, were the words, "For my son. May you always remember what matters." Marcus turned the pages slowly. The journal had belonged to Eleanor's father, the man who had served with Marcus's own father in Vietnam. It was filled with entries spanning decades, reflections on war, on peace, on family, on duty. on the meaning of honor in a world that often seemed to have forgotten it. Near the end, one passage stood out. I have learned that courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision to act despite fear. It is the choice to stand when every instinct tells you to run. It is the commitment to do what is right, even when what is right costs you everything. My son may never read these words. My daughter may never understand them. But perhaps, someday, someone will. Someone who needs to hear them. Someone who is standing at the edge of a decision that will define who they are. To that person, I say this: you are not alone. You have never been alone. The ones who came before you faced the same fears, the same doubts, the same darkness, and they found their way through. Not because they were stronger than everyone else, but because they refused to give up. That is all courage is, the refusal to give up. Hold on to that. It will carry you further than you ever imagined. Marcus closed the journal. He sat in the quiet of his room, the weight of generations pressing against his heart. He understood now. The coin, the journal, the stories passed from father to child, from mentor to student, from one generation to the next. They were not just memories. They were instructions, blueprints for how to live, how to serve, how to matter. He picked up his phone and called Victor. I need to tell you something, he said. I am listening. I am ready. There was a pause. Then Victor spoke, his voice warm. I know you are. The transfer of leadership happened quietly. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement, just a meeting of the brothers, a vote of confidence, and a simple exchange of words. Marcus Cole is your president now, Victor said. He has earned your trust, he has earned your respect, and he has earned the right to lead. The brothers nodded. Some clapped. Some simply raised their glasses in silent salute. It was not about celebration. It was about acknowledgement, about the passing of a torch that had been carried for decades. Marcus stood before them, his heart full. I am not going to promise you that everything will be easy, he said. I am not going to tell you that the road ahead is clear. There will be challenges. There will be setbacks. There will be moments when the world seems determined to tear us down. He paused. But I will promise you this. I will never stop fighting for what we believe in. I will never stop standing up for the people who cannot stand up for themselves. And I will never ever forget that our strength comes not from our individual power, but from our unity, from our brotherhood, from the bonds that tie us together across distance and time. He looked around the room, at the faces of his brothers, at the men who had ridden beside him through storms and sunshine, who had stood with him when he was falsely accused, who had helped him expose corruption and rebuild what had been broken. We take care of our own, he said. That is who we are. That is what we do. And as long as I am standing, that will never change. The room was silent. But the silence was not empty. It was full of purpose, full of resolve, full of the unspoken promise that bound them all together. If this story has touched your heart, type these words in the comments. Brotherhood never ends. Let us see how many true believers are watching right now. Years passed. Cedar Falls changed, as all places do. New businesses opened, old ones closed, families came and went, children grew into adults grew into elders. The cycle continued, as it always had. But some things remained constant. The Veterans Housing Project expanded. What had started as 50 homes became 100, then 200. A community took root. Veterans helping veterans, neighbors supporting neighbors, a network of care that stretched across the region. The Iron Wolves rode on. New members joined, old members retired. But the brotherhood endured. The charity rides continued. The food drives continued. The mentorship programs continued. The work never stopped, because the need never stopped. Marcus led with the same quiet strength that had defined him from the beginning. He did not seek attention. He did not crave recognition. He simply did what needed to be done, day after day, year after year. He married a woman named Sarah, who had grown up in Cedar Falls, who had watched him from afar for years before they finally met at a fundraiser for the Veterans Project. She understood him in ways that no one else ever had. She saw the weight he carried. She helped him bear it. They had 2 children, a boy named Daniel, after Marcus's father, a girl named Eleanor, after the woman who had saved his life. Marcus taught them the same lessons he had learned, about courage, about honor, about the importance of standing up for what is right. He showed them the coin, the journal, the photographs of men who had served and sacrificed long before they were born. This is your heritage, he told them. This is who you are. The children listened, and in their eyes, Marcus saw the same spark that had once burned in his own. The spark of purpose, of duty, of something larger than themselves. One evening, years after everything had changed, Marcus sat on the porch of his home, watching the sun set. His children were grown now. Daniel had joined the Marines, following in his grandfather's footsteps. Eleanor had become a lawyer, dedicated to fighting for the rights of the powerless. Sarah sat beside him, her hand in his. They did not speak. They did not need to. The silence between them was comfortable, complete. In the distance, Marcus could hear the sound of motorcycles, the iron wolves riding out for their weekly gathering. The thunder of engines echoed through the valley, familiar and reassuring. He thought about everything that had happened: the arrest, the trial, the exposure of corruption, the building of something new from the ashes of something broken. He thought about the people who had helped him along the way: Victor, Eleanor, Bradley, the brothers who had stood beside him through every storm. He thought about the people he had never met, but who had shaped his life nonetheless. His father, Eleanor's father, the generations of men and women who had passed down their values like treasured heirlooms. And he realized that this was what it meant to live a meaningful life, not the accumulation of wealth or power, not the pursuit of fame or glory, but the quiet, steady work of making the world a little bit better than you found it, of lifting others up, of passing on what you have learned to those who come after. He squeezed Sarah's hand. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For everything." She smiled, the kind of smile that had sustained him through every dark night and difficult day. "We are not done yet," she said. He laughed. "No, I suppose we are not." He looked at the sunset, at the colors bleeding across the sky, at the mountains standing silent and eternal in the distance. He thought about what lay ahead, the challenges, the opportunities, the moments of doubt and the moments of triumph, the endless cycle of struggle and renewal that defined the human experience. He was ready for all of it, because he was not alone. He had never been alone. The last chapter of this story is not really an ending, it is a beginning. The Iron Wolves continue to ride. New generations have taken up the mantle. The sons and daughters of the original brothers have joined the club, carrying forward the traditions and values that have defined it for decades. The Veterans Housing Project has become a model for communities across the country. Other towns have followed Cedar Falls' example, building their own sanctuaries for those who served. Bradley Whitmore found his own path to redemption. He became an advocate for government transparency, dedicating his life to preventing the kind of corruption his father had embodied. He and Marcus are not friends exactly, but they have an understanding, a mutual respect born from shared struggle. Judge Harold Whitmore died in prison, 3 years into his sentence. A heart attack, the official report said. But those who knew him suspected that it was something else, the weight of finally facing what he had become. Marcus thinks about him sometimes, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a kind of sad recognition, a reminder of what happens when power corrupts absolutely. He thinks about Eleanor Vance often, about the debt between their fathers that had reached across generations to save him, about the journal that sits on his nightstand, worn and treasured. He thinks about his own father, about the sacrifices he made, about the values he instilled, about the legacy he left behind, and he thinks about what comes next, because the work is never finished, the fight is never over, there will always be injustice to confront, always corruption to expose, always innocent people who need someone to stand up for them. That is the burden of those who choose to serve, and it is also the privilege. Marcus stands in the doorway of the clubhouse, watching the sunset. Another day ending, another night beginning. The cycle continues, as it always has. Behind him, he can hear the voices of his brothers, laughter and conversation and the clink of glasses, the sounds of family. He smiles. This is where he belongs. This is who he is. A rider, a brother, a guardian, forever faithful, forever standing, forever home. If you watch this far, it is because you like this story. Leave a comment saying, "I watched this far so I can get to know you and know who really likes the stories on this channel." And if this story touched your heart, please hit the like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not already. Turn on notifications so you never miss a story, because this is just the beginning. There are more stories to tell, more journeys to take, more moments of courage and compassion to share. Together, we ride on, always faithful, always forward, always together. Thank you for being part of this brotherhood. Thank you for watching. Thank you for believing. Until next time, stay strong, stay kind, and never, ever look away.